Most people would say $2,000 is a lot of money to lose. But for my family, it was the best investment my uncle ever made. I still remember the day clearly, even though I was just a kid. There were two pieces of paper sitting on our kitchen table. One was a court order, a bill for a $2,000 criminal fine. The other was a sentencing report. 6 years in state prison for the man who tried to destroy my parents. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now because stories like this, they get absolutely wild. Trust me, you aren't going to believe how far one man went to protect his sister. Back then, my dad's face didn't even look like his own anymore. It was a mess of purple bruises, surgical stitches, and a nose that had been shattered by a heavy glass beer pitcher in a dark bar. We knew who did it. The piece of crap from my mom's college even bragged about it to her face. But the police? They said their hands were tied. No evidence, no witnesses, just a he said, she said nightmare. But they forgot one thing. My uncle was a private investigator, and he didn't care about playing fair. He cared about winning. That's when I made my first realization. Justice isn't always legal. Before we get into the drinking buddy trap my uncle set, do me a huge favor. Smash that subscribe button and turn on notifications. I post real-life revenge stories like this every week, and trust me, the legal loophole in this one is a total game changer. All right, let's go back to the beginning. My parents were basically kids themselves when they had me. They weren't teenagers, but they'd barely crossed that line. Imagine trying to navigate junior year of college while also figuring out how to change diapers and keep a toddler from eating the dog's food. That was our life. Money was tight, and time was even tighter. My mom and dad were always buried under a mountain of textbooks, smelling like cheap highlighter ink and stale coffee. Because they were full-time students, I spent most of my days at my grandparents' house. We all lived in the same area, a tight-knit community where everyone knew everyone's business. The college campus was only a few miles away, looming over the town like a promise of a better future. Did you finish the prep for the sociology exam? I remember my mom asking my dad one morning. She was balancing a heavy backpack on one shoulder and me on her hip. Barely, my dad laughed, kissing her forehead. Satyan, I'll finish it in the library between classes. You go. I've got the little guy today. They were happy. Tired, but happy. They were the golden couple of their small circle. The ones who had managed to stay together and build a family while everyone else was busy worrying about frat parties. They worked hard, they loved harder, and they didn't have an enemy in the world. Or so they thought. Because they were so young, they still liked to go out on occasion. Just a few hours of being normal 20-somethings instead of mom and dad. A chance to grab a drink, hear some music, and forget about tuition bills for a night. You sure you don't mind watching him, Mom? My mother asked my grandma, adjusting her earrings in the hallway mirror. Go, my grandma said, shooing them out the door. Have fun. Be safe. Don't do anything I wouldn't do. My dad grabbed his keys, grinning. We'll be back by midnight. Promise. He had no idea that by midnight, his life and his face would never be the same. He didn't know that a piece of human filth was already waiting in the shadows of a crowded bar, looking for a target. The bar was called the Rusty Spigot, or something equally generic. It was the kind of place that smelled like floor wax and spilled lager, where the music was always 3 decibels too loud for a real conversation. That night, it was packed. A sea of college kids, neon beer signs, and thick, humid air that made your skin feel tacky. My parents were tucked into a corner booth, just enjoying the rare luxury of not being on duty. But then, my dad went to the bar to grab another round. That's when he saw him. The guy was leaning against a pillar, watching my mom with an expression that made her skin crawl. He wasn't just looking, he was hunting. When my dad walked away, the guy pounced. He slid into the seat my dad had just vacated. "You look lonely," the guy said, his voice oily even over the thumping bass. "I'm not," my mom snapped, pulling her coat closer. "My husband is right there." The guy didn't move. Instead, he leaned in closer, his breath smelling like cheap tequila and cigarettes. "He's a lucky guy. Maybe too lucky." Before my mom could react, he reached out and gripped her thigh, his fingers digging into her skin. "Get your hand off me," she shouted, trying to shove him away. He didn't take no for an answer. He just laughed, a dry, mocking sound. "Come on, sweetheart. Don't be like that." That was the moment my dad returned. He didn't hesitate. He dropped the drinks, glass shattering on the floor, and shoved the guy back. She said, "Get lost. Move. Now." The guy stood up slowly. He was taller than my dad, with a jagged scar near his eyebrow and eyes that looked completely empty. For a second, it felt like the whole bar went quiet. "My bad," the guy muttered, putting his hands up in a fake gesture of peace. "Just being friendly. No need to get your blood pressure up." He backed away, disappearing into the crowd near the dartboards. My dad was shaking, his adrenaline redlining. "You okay?" he asked my mom, his voice raw. "I am now," she whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. Let's stay for one more. I don't want him to think he scared us off." It was a small mistake, a prideful one. They stayed. They danced. Half an hour later, the music was pumping, the lights were flashing, and they'd almost forgotten the creep. My dad was laughing at something my mom said when it happened. He didn't see the hand reach out from the press of the crowd. He didn't see the heavy glass pitcher filled with amber liquid swinging through the air. The sound wasn't like the movies. It wasn't a clean break. It was a sickening, wet thud followed by the unmistakable tinkle of glass raining onto the floor. My dad didn't even have time to put his hands up. The pitcher caught him square in the face, the bridge of his nose taking the full force of the impact. I remember my mom telling me later that for a split second, time just stopped. My dad stood there, swaying, his eyes wide and blank. Then the red started. It didn't just drip, it sprayed. A hot, metallic-smelling fountain that soaked his white button-down shirt in seconds. "Derek!" my mom screamed, her voice lost in the roar of the bass. He collapsed like a puppet with its strings cut. His head hit the edge of the bar on the way down, adding a dull thud to the chaos. The crowd, which had been a sea of dancing bodies seconds ago, suddenly became a panicked stampede. People were pushing, shoving, trying to get away from the blood. "Call an ambulance!" my mom shrieked, dropping to her knees in the beer-slicked sawdust. "Somebody help him!" She looked up, eyes darting through the strobe lights and the shadows. The bar was semi-dark, the air thick with sweat and the smell of spilled ale. She looked for the guy with the scar. She looked for anyone who looked guilty. But there was nothing. Just a wall of faceless students and the back of a dark hoodie disappearing through the side exit. "Did you see him?" a bouncer shouted, pushing through the crowd. "No," my mom sobbed, clutching my dad's head to her chest. Her hands were already stained deep crimson. It came out of nowhere. He's not breathing right. Derek, look at me." My dad's breathing was a horrific, gurgling sound. His nose was flattened, shifted to the left at an angle that didn't look human. He was out cold, his body twitching sporadically. When the paramedics finally arrived, the bar lights had been flipped on. The cool college hangout suddenly looked like a slaughterhouse. Under the harsh, fluorescent glare, the pool of blood around my dad's head looked black. "He's got a massive concussion," I heard one of them say as they loaded the stretcher. "Possible skull fracture. We need to move." My mom followed them out, her legs shaking so hard she could barely stand. She looked back at the bar one last time. The music had finally stopped, and in the silence, she could hear the drip, drip, drip of beer leaking off the counter. The police were already there, pens out, looking bored. "Any description of the suspect?" the officer asked, not even looking up from his notepad. "It was dark," my mom whispered, her voice trembling. "Everyone was dancing. I didn't see his face." "Right," the cop sighed. "Pressing charges against unknown. We'll file the report, but don't hold your breath. In a place this crowded, he's a ghost." That was their first mistake. They assumed because they couldn't see him, he couldn't see them. The hospital didn't smell like beer and sweat. It smelled like bleach and industrial floor cleaner, a sharp, stinging scent that burned the back of my mom's throat. She sat in a plastic chair in the waiting room, staring at her own fingernails. There was dried blood under the cuticles. No matter how much she scrubbed in the bathroom sink, a thin, rust-colored line remained. "Mrs. Miller?" A doctor walked in, looking like he'd been awake for 48 hours straight. My mom stood up so fast the chair screeched against the linoleum. Is he going to be okay?" "He's stable," the doctor said, flipping through a chart. "The nose is a clean break, but the concussion is severe. We're looking at a grade 3. He's got some retrograde amnesia. He doesn't remember the strike, and his memory of the hour leading up to it is, well, it's a blur." When they finally let her into the room, she almost turned around and walked back out. My dad looked like a stranger. His eyes were swollen shut, two dark, puffy slits in a face that was turning shades of yellow and deep plum. A thick white bandage was taped across the bridge of his nose, and an IV hissed quietly next to the bed. "Hey," she whispered, taking his hand. It felt cold. "Jen?" His voice was thick, coming mostly through his mouth because he couldn't breathe through his nose. "What happened?" I was getting a drink, and then everything went black." "Someone hit you, Derek, with a pitcher." He tried to sit up but groaned and fell back against the pillows. "Who? Did they catch him?" "No," she said, her voice cracking. "Nobody saw anything. The police. They said there's nothing they can do." My dad turned his head away, a single tear leaking from the corner of his swollen eye. He wasn't just hurt. He was humiliated. He was a young father, a protector, and he'd been taken down by a ghost in a room full of people. "I feel like my head is in a vice," he wheezed. "Just sleep," she whispered. "I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." But as she sat there in the quiet of the room, watching the heart monitor beep, she felt a prickle on the back of her neck. That feeling you get when someone is watching you. She told herself it was just the trauma, just the lack of sleep. She was wrong. 3 days later, my dad was home, but he wasn't back. He spent most of his time in a darkened bedroom with a damp cloth over his eyes, unable to handle the light or the noise of the TV. My mom had to go back to campus. She had midterms coming up. And with my dad out of work, she couldn't afford to lose her scholarship. The university quad felt different now. Every time a door slammed or a group of guys laughed too loud, she flinched. She kept her head down, clutching her books to her chest like armor. She was crossing the plaza toward the library when she saw him. He was leaning against a brick planter, tossing a coin into the air and catching it. Clink, catch, clink, catch. He was wearing a college hoodie, looking like every other student on campus. But as she got closer, she recognized the scar and the eyes. Her heart didn't just beat. It hammered against her ribs until she felt dizzy. She tried to walk faster, her sneakers squeaking on the pavement. "Hey, Jen, right?" The voice was like a cold finger down her spine. She stopped, frozen. He stepped into her path, a smug, self-satisfied grin spreading across his face. "I heard about your husband. Tough break. Literally." "Leave me alone," she whispered, her voice trembling. He leaned in, way too close. He smelled like expensive cigarettes and peppermint gum, a sickeningly sweet combination. "You know, Derek really should mind his manners. When a guy wants to be friendly, you don't start a fight. It's rude." "It was you," she gasped, her eyes filling with tears. "You hit him." He didn't deny it. He didn't even blink. He just looked her up and down, his gaze lingering where he'd touched her at the bar. "That little bit of touching I did, it didn't hurt anyone. It wasn't that bad. But what happened to your man? That was just a warning." "I'm calling the police," she said, reaching for her bag. He laughed, a low, guttural sound. "Go ahead. Tell them what? That a guy said hi to you on the quad? I didn't say I did anything. I'm just concerned. But listen closely, sweetheart. If I want to do it again, I will. And next time, I might do more." He stepped back, giving her a mocking little wave. "See you in class, Jen." She didn't move until he disappeared into the student union. The sun was out, the birds were chirping, and students were throwing frisbees 50 feet away. But for my mom, the world had just turned ice cold. She didn't go to the library. She ran to her car, locked the doors, and sobbed until she couldn't breathe. She realized then that this wasn't over. It was just starting. The kitchen was quiet when she got home, except for the low hum of the refrigerator. My grandparents had dropped me off an hour ago, and I was playing with plastic blocks on the linoleum floor. I remember looking up at her and stopping. Even as a little kid, I knew something was wrong. Her mascara was smeared into dark, jagged tracks down her cheeks, and her hands were shaking so hard she dropped her car keys 3 times before they hit the counter with a metallic clatter. "Jen?" My dad's voice drifted from the bedroom, thin and raspy. "Is that you?" She didn't answer. She just stood there, staring at the wall. He came shuffling out a moment later, squinting against the dim afternoon light. He looked like a ghost of the man he'd been a week ago. The bridge of his nose was a sickly shade of yellow-green, held together by strips of medical tape. "I saw him," she whispered. My dad stopped mid-step. "Who?" "The guy, from the bar. He's in our classes, Derek. He's a student." She collapsed into a kitchen chair, her shoulders heaving. "He came up to me. He told me you should have minded your manners. He said what he did to me wasn't that bad. And then he threatened me. He said if he wanted to do it again, he would." The air in the room seemed to vanish. My dad's face went from pale to a deep, dangerous red. He grabbed the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. "He threatened you? To your face? On campus?" "He knows we can't prove it," she sobbed. "He's untouchable. The police said unknown suspect. If I go back now and say it's him, It's just my word against his. He'll just say I'm a crazy, grieving wife making things up. My dad let out a sound, a low, guttural growl of pure, helpless rage. He kicked the trash can, sending it skidding across the floor, then immediately winced and clutched his head as the concussion flared back to life. "I can't even protect you," he wheezed, sliding down the wall until he was sitting on the floor. "I'm sitting here with a broken face while this piece of garbage follows you around school." I remember crawling over to him, putting my small hand on his knee. He looked at me, then at my mom, and he just broke. The two of them sat there in the middle of the kitchen crying, not the quiet kind, but the loud, ugly sobbing of people who have reached their breaking point. The family was called. My grandparents, my aunts, everyone came over that night. We sat in the living room under the yellow glow of the floor lamp, speaking in hushed, terrified whispers. It was a he said, she said trap. No evidence. No name. No witnesses who would speak up. Everyone was treading on eggshells, looking over their shoulders, jumping every time the wind rattled the window pane. We were a family of victims, waiting for the next blow to fall. But then, my mom's phone rang. It was her brother. My Uncle Steve didn't arrive like a panicked relative. He arrived like a man on a business trip. When he pulled into the driveway, he wasn't driving a flashy sports car. He was in a neutral-colored sedan that looked like it could blend into any parking lot in the world. He walked into the house, dropped a heavy leather satchel on the table, and didn't even take off his coat before he pulled my mom into a hug. He smelled like cold air and old paper. "Tell me everything," he said. His voice was calm, methodical. It was the voice of a man who looked at chaos and saw a puzzle. My mom started from the beginning, her voice shaky. She told him about the bar, the glass pitcher, the blood, and finally, the conversation on the quad. Uncle Steve didn't interrupt once. He took out a small, spiral-bound notebook and a black pen, jotting down notes in a shorthand I didn't understand. "He called you by name?" Steve asked, his eyes narrowing. "He said Jen," she whispered. "He knew who I was. And you're sure about the scar?" "I'll never forget it." Steve looked over at my dad, who was sitting in the corner, looking defeated. "Derek, I need you to stay home. Keep the doors locked. Don't go looking for this guy. You're hurt and you're emotional. That's how people make mistakes." "I can't just do nothing, Steve," my dad snapped, his voice thick with frustration. "You aren't doing nothing," Steve said, clicking his pen shut. "You're taking care of your family. I'm going to do the rest. I'm a private investigator for a reason, Derek. I don't need a badge to find out who this piece of filth is. I just need a little bit of time." He opened his satchel and pulled out a high-powered camera lens and a set of binoculars. "The police need a beyond a reasonable doubt case," Steve said, looking at my mom. "I just need a face. Point him out to me tomorrow. After that, he belongs to me." The next morning, the air was crisp, the kind of cold that bites at your lungs. Uncle Steve sat in his sedan in the far corner of the campus parking lot, the engine off. He had my mom sit in the passenger seat, slumped down low so her head barely cleared the dashboard. "Don't look directly at everyone," Steve murmured, his eyes scanning the crowd through the rearview mirror. "Just wait until you're sure. Use the binoculars." They waited for 2 hours. My mom's hands were trembling, the plastic casing of the binoculars feeling slick in her grip. Students streamed past. Kids with backpacks, girls laughing, guys in varsity jackets. It felt like looking for a needle in a haystack of normalcy. Then she saw him. He was swaggering down the steps of the Humanities building, flanked by two other guys. He was laughing, his head tilted back, looking like he didn't have a care in the world. The sunlight hit his face, highlighting the jagged scar near his eyebrow. "There," she whispered, her voice catching. "Blue hoodie, red backpack, that's him." Steve didn't move a muscle, but I saw his jaw set. He didn't grab his camera. He didn't jump out of the car. He just watched. He watched how the guy walked, that entitled, heavy-heeled stomp. He watched how he interacted with his friends, shoving one of them playfully, almost too hard. "Got him," Steve said softly. "Go home, Jen. Take the back way. I'll handle it from here." For the next week, Uncle Steve became a ghost. He took sick days, used up every minute of his vacation time, and virtually disappeared into the fabric of the campus. He found out the guy's name, Ryan Vance, a senior, history major. Known for a short fuse and a rich father who kept him in expensive cars and designer clothes. But Steve didn't just want a name, he wanted the dirt. He followed Ryan to a local gym. He followed him to a frat house. One night, he followed him to a different bar, 3 towns over. Steve sat in a dark corner, a baseball cap pulled low, and sipping a club soda. He watched Ryan slip a small plastic baggie to a guy in the bathroom. He watched him pocket a wad of cash. Possession, consumption, and distribution, Steve muttered into a small digital recorder later that night. Small time, but it's a start. He was building a file, page by page, photo by photo. But every time Steve looked at the photo of my dad's broken nose, he knew that drugs and theft weren't enough. He didn't just want to arrest this guy. He wanted him to confess Uncle Steve didn't look like a PI anymore. He'd swapped his clean-shaven look for a 3-day stubble and traded his crisp jacket for a faded flannel shirt that smelled like wood smoke and motor oil. He looked like just another blue-collar guy looking to blow off steam after a long shift. The bar was a dive called The Alibi. It was dim, the air thick with the smell of pickled eggs and cheap floor cleaner. Uncle Steve took a stool 3 down from Ryan Vance. He didn't rush it. He spent the first hour staring at the TV, barely acknowledging anyone. "Tough night?" Steve asked, sliding a $10 bill toward the bartender. Ryan glanced over, eyes bloodshot. "Just a long week. Classes are a joke." "Tell me about it," Steve grunted. "I spend all day hauling drywall just to pay for a truck that won't start. Living the dream, right?" Ryan laughed. That same dry, arrogant sound my mom had described. "You're doing it wrong, man. Hard work is for suckers. There are easier ways to get paid." Steve turned slightly, a practiced glint of interest in his eyes. "Yeah? Like what?" "I'm all ears if it means I can stop breaking my back." That was the hook. Over the next 3 hours, Steve played the part of the disgruntled worker to perfection. He bought the rounds. He laughed at Ryan's sexist jokes. He pretended to be impressed by Ryan's stories of easy money and avoiding the cops. By the time the clock hit midnight, Ryan was leaning in close, his breath a foul mix of whiskey and ego. "You're all right, Steve," Ryan slurred, slapping him on the shoulder. "Most guys around here are soft. They don't have the stones to do what needs to be done." "I've got the stones," Steve said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I just haven't had the opportunity. You seem like a guy who knows how to handle himself." "You have no idea," Ryan bragged, his chest puffing out. "I had this guy last week, some punk at a college bar. Thought he could get in my face because I was talking to his girl. I brained him with a pitcher. Didn't even see it coming. He went down like a sack of flour. Uncle Steve felt a surge of ice-cold rage skip through his veins. He looked at the man who had shattered his brother-in-law's face, and he had to clench his fist under the bar to keep from swinging. But he didn't. He just grinned. "A pitcher? Damn, that's cold," Steve chuckled. "Did the cops come knocking?" "Cops!" Ryan spat on the floor. "Cops couldn't find their own shadows in that place. I walked right out the side door. If you're smart, you're invisible." Steve nodded, signaling the bartender for another round. "I like your style, Ryan. We should talk more. I might have a business proposition for a guy with your specific skill set." As Ryan drank the fresh whiskey, Steve felt the weight of the digital recorder in his pocket. It was a start, but it wasn't enough. Not for court. He needed Ryan on camera. He needed the world to see the ghost in high definition. "Tell you what," Steve said, standing up. "I've got a bottle of the good stuff back at my motel. Why don't we head there? We can talk privately." Ryan Vance grinned, unaware that he was walking straight into a cage. The motel room smelled like lemon-scented furniture polish and the faint metallic tang of an old air conditioner. It was a generic space: 2 double beds, a bolted-down TV, and a small wooden desk. But Uncle Steve had spent 3 hours prepping it. Hidden in the shadows of a half-open drawer was a high-definition lens, positioned perfectly to capture the chair by the window. "Nice place," Ryan slurred, stumbling inside. He dropped into the chair, looking loose and overconfident. A bit depressing, but it works." "It's quiet," Steve said, grabbing a bottle of expensive bourbon from the dresser. He poured 2 glasses, making sure Ryan's was a double-double. "And quiet is good when you're talking about the kind of money I'm looking at." Steve sat on the edge of the bed, directly in the camera's line of sight. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I'm looking for someone who isn't afraid to get their hands dirty. I've got a guy, an associate, who needs some debt collection done. But it has to be handled with a certain level of aggression." Ryan took a long pull of the bourbon, his eyes narrowing. "Aggression is my middle name. I told you about that guy at the bar, didn't I?" "You did," Steve said, his voice steady, encouraging. "But honestly, I thought you were just talking big. It's a lot of talk to say you brained a guy with a pitcher and just walked away." "You think I'm lying?" Ryan's face flushed a deep, angry red. He leaned into the light, his scar standing out like a white ridge against his skin. "I hit that loser so hard his nose exploded. I saw the blood hit the counter. He went down, and his little wife started screaming like a pig." Steve nodded, his heart drumming a rhythm against his ribs. "Keep going. Give me the details." "And she didn't see you?" "She was right there." "She was too busy crying over her broken husband." Ryan laughed, a cruel, jagged sound that filled the small room. "Besides, I'd already marked her. I followed her on campus a few days later, told her to keep her mouth shut or I'd do worse next time. I told her that little grope I gave her was just the beginning if she didn't play nice." He leaned back, looking proud of himself. "She's terrified of me, Steve. That's how you handle people. You break the man, and you own the woman." Every instinct in Uncle Steve's body screamed at him to reach across the gap and wrap his hands around Ryan's throat. He thought of his sister's tears. He thought of the eggshells his family had been walking on for weeks. But he didn't move. He just took a slow sip of his drink. "You really covered your tracks," Steve said. "But what about the other stuff? The baggies I saw you moving? You're a busy guy, Ryan." "The grass, the pills, that's just lunch money," Ryan bragged, fueled by the bourbon and the need to impress his new crook friend. He rattled off a list of names: Suppliers, drop points, the theft of some lab equipment from the science building. It was a verbal laundry list of every illegal thing he'd done in the last 6 months. He didn't notice the small green light blinking deep inside the dresser drawer. "I like you, Ryan," Steve said, standing up. He felt a wave of cold, crystalline satisfaction. "You're exactly what I was looking for." "So, I'm in?" Ryan asked, sticking out his hand. Steve looked at the hand, the same hand that had gripped the pitcher. He didn't shake it. "Oh, you're definitely in," Steve said. "Deeper than you think." Uncle Steve didn't sleep that night. He sat in the motel room, bathed in the blue light of his laptop, watching the footage over and over. Ryan Vance's face was crystal clear. His voice, bragging about breaking the man and owning the woman, was unmistakable. It was the perfect confession. But Uncle Steve was a PI. He knew the law, and he knew the dark truth about his country's justice system. "Illegal surveillance," he muttered to the empty room. In this jurisdiction, recording someone in secret was a crime. If the police did it, the tape would be thrown out of court faster than a bad check. It was a fruit of the poisonous tree situation. But Uncle Steve had spent years studying the gray areas. There was a paradox. While the act of filming was illegal for him, the evidence itself could still be admissible if it wasn't gathered by a government agency. He had a choice. He could keep the tape secret and try to blackmail Ryan, or he could use it to destroy him and accept the consequences for himself. The next morning, Steve walked into the precinct. He didn't ask for a lawyer. He walked straight up to the sergeant's desk and placed a manila envelope and his PI license on the counter. "I'm here to report an assault, a series of drug felonies, and a stalking case," Steve said. His voice was flat, professional. The sergeant looked up, bored. "We already have a file on the bar incident. Unknown suspect. Case is cold." "It's not cold anymore," Steve said, sliding a thumb drive across the wood. "On this drive, you'll find a full confession from Ryan Vance. He admits to the pitcher attack, the harassment of my sister, and he gives you a map of his drug distribution network." The sergeant reached for the drive, but Steve held up a hand. "There's one more thing," Steve said. "I filmed that confession in a motel room without his consent. I'm a private investigator, not a cop. I know that's a violation of the privacy statutes." The sergeant's eyes narrowed. "You're turning yourself in?" "I'm providing evidence for a violent felony," Steve replied, his gaze unwavering. "And I'm admitting to the misdemeanor of illegal surveillance to ensure this tape is authenticated. I'll take the fine. Just make sure he takes the cell." Within an hour, the ghost of the campus was a ghost no more. The police, fueled by the specific details of the drug suppliers Ryan had drunkenly named, moved fast. They didn't just want the assault. They wanted the whole network. Steve sat in the interrogation room, not as a witness, but as a man waiting for his own citation. He didn't care. He thought about my dad's face. He thought about my mom being able to walk across the quad without looking over her shoulder. And the legal gamble was simple. Steve would pay a few $1,000s, so Ryan would pay with his life. "You're a crazy son of a... You know that?" the sergeant said, returning to the room. Steve just smiled. It was the first time he'd looked truly relaxed in weeks. "I'm a brother. There's a difference." The courtroom was silent, the air heavy with the smell of old wood and floor wax. Ryan Vance didn't look like a tough guy anymore. Without his hoodies and his drinking buddies, he looked small. He sat at the defense table in a suit that sat poorly on his shoulders, his expensive lawyer whispering in his ear. My parents sat in the front row. My dad's nose was still slightly crooked, a permanent reminder of that night. But his eyes were clear. My mom held his hand so tightly her knuckles were white. "The prosecution calls Steve Miller to the stand," the bailiff announced. The defense tried everything. They argued the video was a violation of privacy. They called my uncle a predator who had manipulated a poor, drunken student. Ryan sat there, nodding along, a smug smirk crawling back onto his face. He thought he was going to walk. He thought the illegal tape would be his get-out-of-jail-free card. Then, the judge made her ruling. While the court recognizes the witness's actions were a violation of civil statutes, the judge said, her voice echoing off the high ceilings, the evidence was not obtained by the state. The confession is admissible. They played the tape. The entire courtroom watched as Ryan's face filled the large monitors. We heard the crueler-than-thou laugh. We heard him call my mom a pig. We heard the pride in his voice as he described the wet thud of the pitcher hitting my dad's face. The smirk on Ryan's face didn't just fade, it vanished. He turned a sickly shade of gray, looking like he might be sick right there on the defense table. His own father, sitting 3 rows back, put his head in his hands. When the verdict came down, it wasn't just a slap on the wrist. Between the aggravated assault, the stalking, and the mountain of drug evidence my uncle had uncovered, the judge was done being lenient. 6 years, the judge declared, slamming the gavel. The sound was like a gunshot. To be served in a maximum security facility, and a total of $50,000 in civil damages to the victims. Ryan was led out in handcuffs, the metal clinking as he stumbled. He tried to look at my mom one last time, but he couldn't hold her gaze. He was a ghost again, but this time, he was heading into a cage. After the room cleared, a police officer approached my uncle. He handed him a slip of paper. "Your citation, Mr. Miller. $2,000 for the illegal recording. You have 30 days to pay." Uncle Steve took the paper, looked at the $2,000 figure, and then looked at my mom, who was finally, for the first time in months, breathing easily. "Best money I ever spent," he said. A year later, the world looked different. My dad's face had healed, though if you looked closely, you could still see the slight ridge on the bridge of his nose, a battle scar from a war he didn't ask for. But the fear was gone. I remember sitting in our backyard during a family barbecue. The smell of charcoal and grilled burgers filled the air, and for the first time, nobody was jumping at the sound of a car door slamming in the driveway. My mom was laughing, a real, deep laugh that reached her eyes. She had finished her degree, walking across that same quad where a monster once tried to own her, with her head held high. Uncle Steve was there too, leaning against the porch railing with a cold beer in his hand. He looked exactly the same, calm, observant, the silent guardian of our family. "Any regrets, Steve?" my dad asked, nodding toward the house where the court papers were probably filed away in a drawer. Steve took a slow sip of his drink and looked out at the lawn where I was running through the sprinklers. "I paid the fine last Tuesday," he said simply. "The clerk asked me if I wanted a receipt. I told her to frame it." He wasn't bragging. It wasn't about being a tough guy. It was about the fact that for $2,000, he had bought my parents their lives back. He'd traded a bit of his own clean record to ensure that a predator couldn't hurt another student, another wife, or another father. Ryan Vance was currently sitting in a cell, learning that mind your manners meant something very different on the inside. He had thought he was the hunter, but he'd ended up as the prey of a man who understood that sometimes you have to go into the dirt to pull someone else out of it. Looking back on it now, as an adult, I realize how close we came to being a statistic. We were just a young, vulnerable family that the system was ready to forget. If not for my uncle's sick days and his motel room trap, my mom might still be looking over her shoulder. It taught me something I've never forgotten. Justice isn't a gift the government gives you. Sometimes it's something you have to go out and take. So that's the story of how my uncle bought our freedom for $2,000. Looking back, I wouldn't change a thing. If you think my uncle did the right thing, or if you would have handled it differently, let me know in the comments. Subscribe for more real-life revenge stories every single week. I've got a playlist of ones even crazier than this. Catch you in the next video.